It started with a lie so small, I almost didn't catch it. Friday night, Kelly was running late. She texted to say she was stuck at work, a project deadline keeping her from our usual date night. I believed her. Why wouldn't I? Kelly was my wife, my best friend, the woman I'd married 8 years ago under a canopy of golden fall leaves. But then I found the receipt. It wasn't much, just a crumpled slip of paper from a bar downtown. 2 cocktails, a plate of sliders, and a timestamp that didn't match her story. It wasn't the cost or the contents that made my stomach churn. It was the time, 8:47 p.m., smack in the middle of our supposed working late excuse. I held the receipt in my hand, staring at the jagged edges where it had been torn. Kelly wasn't careless. She was meticulous, always keeping track of everything from grocery lists to anniversary dates. That's what made the slip-up so glaring, like a crack in a pane of glass that had seemed unbreakable. I confronted her about it that night, my tone light, almost joking. "What's this?" I asked, holding up the receipt. "A little after-work celebration?" Her smile didn't falter, not even for a second. She took the receipt from my hand, glanced at it, and laughed. "Oh, that? We had a team meeting, and everyone decided to grab drinks after. I didn't think it was a big deal." Her answer was smooth, her delivery flawless. But something about the way she avoided my eyes made my chest tighten. I told myself I was overthinking it. Kelly had never given me a reason to doubt her. She was sharp, ambitious, and fiercely independent. The kind of woman who didn't tolerate nonsense from anyone, including me. If she said it was a team outing, it was a team outing. But then came the scarf. A week later, I found it draped over the back of the passenger seat in her car. A red cashmere scarf, soft and expensive looking. It wasn't hers. I knew Kelly's wardrobe inside and out, the result of years of carrying her bags through department stores and nodding at dresses I couldn't tell apart. Kelly didn't wear red. She said it clashed with her hair. When I asked her about it, she barely glanced at the scarf before shoving it into her bag. "Oh, that's Emily's. She must have left it in the car after lunch the other day. I'll give it back to her tomorrow." Her response was so casual, so dismissive, that I almost let it go. Almost. But something gnawed at me, a quiet whisper in the back of my mind that refused to be silenced. Emily didn't wear red either. That night, as I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, the whispers grew louder. Kelly's late nights, her sudden interest in spin classes and new outfits, the way her phone never left her side anymore. All of it began to weave together into a pattern I couldn't ignore. I told myself I was being paranoid, that I was looking for problems where none existed. But the doubt had already taken root, spreading through me like poison. I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong, that Kelly was slipping away from me, one lie at a time. I needed to know the truth, no matter how much it hurt. The next morning, while Kelly was in the shower, I picked up her phone. My hands trembled as I swiped at the screen, but it was locked. She'd never used a passcode before. I stared at the numbers, my mind racing. It wasn't her birthday or mine. Not our anniversary. I tried her childhood dog's name, but nothing worked. When Kelly came out of the bathroom, her hair wrapped in a towel, I was sitting at the kitchen table, pretending to read the paper. She kissed me on the cheek, her smile as bright as ever. "Off to work," she said, her tone breezy. "Don't wait up. Late meeting again." I nodded, forcing a smile as she walked out the door. As soon as she left, I picked up my phone and started searching. For what I wasn't sure. Advice, clues, anything to confirm or deny the gnawing suspicion that was eating me alive. What I found instead was something I hadn't considered before, a way to track her phone without her knowing. It wasn't hard to set up. By the time Kelly came home that night, her phone was back on the counter, untouched, and the app I'd installed was silently working in the background. I felt a pang of guilt as I watched her pour a glass of wine and settle onto the couch, scrolling through her emails like nothing had changed. But something had changed. I wasn't the husband who trusted his wife implicitly anymore. I was a man searching for answers in the shadows of my marriage. Kelly thought she was clever, that her lies were untraceable. But she didn't know me as well as she thought. I wasn't just going to uncover the truth. I was going to unravel it, thread by thread, until there was nothing left to hide. The whispers of doubt had become a roar. And now, there was no turning back. The first ping from the tracker came the next evening. Kelly had left the house dressed to kill. A black sheath dress I didn't recognize, paired with heels I knew she couldn't wear for long without complaining. When I asked where she was going, she said it was a networking event downtown, something for work. She kissed me on the cheek and told me not to wait up. I watched her leave, her heels clicking against the hardwood floor, her scent lingering in the air long after the doors shut behind her. The moment I heard her car pull away, I grabbed my phone and opened the app. The first stop was exactly where she'd said it would be, a swanky cocktail bar on the edge of downtown, the kind of place where deals were made over overpriced martinis. I stared at the map, half hoping it would end there, that she'd go home after a couple of hours and prove me wrong. But she didn't. At 9:34 p.m., the dot moved, weaving through the streets until it stopped in front of a boutique hotel a few blocks away. My stomach churned as I stared at the screen, my mind racing with possibilities I didn't want to consider. I didn't need to see inside to know what was happening. I wanted to drive there, to catch her in the act, to confront her with the proof of her betrayal. But I stopped myself. This wasn't about catching her red-handed. It was about control, about making sure I had every piece of the puzzle before I confronted her. If Kelly thought she could outmaneuver me, she was wrong. The next morning, she came home earlier than I expected. I was sitting at the kitchen table, nursing my second cup of coffee. When she walked in, her hair slightly tousled and her makeup smudged. She smiled at me, her expression a perfect mask of casual nonchalance. "Good morning," she said, grabbing a glass of water. "Sorry I didn't text. The event went later than I thought." I nodded, keeping my face neutral. "No problem. How was it?" She launched into a rehearsed-sounding story about a panel discussion, complete with anecdotes about people I didn't recognize. I listened, my coffee growing cold in my hands, as she lied to me with the same ease as saying good morning. Her phone buzzed on the counter, and she glanced at it quickly before flipping it face down. I didn't miss the flicker of unease in her eyes, the brief pause before she continued her story. My stomach tightened, but I forced myself to smile and nod in all the right places. When she left the room, I picked up her phone. It was still locked, the passcode an impenetrable barrier between us. But I didn't need it. The tracker app was doing its job, and it had already given me more than enough. Over the next week, the pattern repeated. Kelly's late nights grew more frequent, her excuses more elaborate. Each time, I watched the tracker, mapping her movements with precision. There were coffee shops, restaurants, and always the hotel, its name now burned into my brain. The visits were never long, an hour, maybe two, but they were enough to confirm what I already knew. It wasn't just physical. It was emotional, too. The way she laughed when she came home, her cheeks flushed, her tone lighter than I'd heard in months. She was happy, alive, and it wasn't because of me. That realization hit harder than anything else. One evening, as I stared at the tracker, I noticed something new. The dot wasn't at the hotel or a bar. It was at a park on the other side of town, a place we used to take weekend walks before life got too busy. The thought of her sitting on one of those benches with someone else made my chest tighten. I grabbed my keys and drove there, parking a safe distance away. It didn't take long to find her. She was sitting on a bench near the fountain, her back to me, her hair catching the fading light. A man sat beside her, his body angled toward hers, his hand resting on her knee. I stayed hidden, watching as they laughed and talked, their connection palpable even from a distance. My hands clenched in a fist, but I didn't move. Confronting her now would be too easy, too predictable. She'd cry, apologize, spin her excuses. I didn't want apologies. I wanted understanding. I wanted her to feel what I felt. When I got home that night, Kelly was already there, sitting on the couch with a glass of wine. She looked up as I walked in, her smile easy. "How was your evening?" she asked, her tone light. I shrugged, keeping my expression neutral. "Just ran a few errands." She nodded, turning her attention back to the TV. I stood there for a moment, watching her, wondering how she could lie so effortlessly, so convincingly. She thought she was untouchable, that her secrets were safe. But she didn't realize I was no longer the man she thought I was. The web she'd spun was tightening, and soon she'd be trapped in it. And when the time came, I would be the one to pull the strings. The weight of what I'd seen at the park lingered for days, pressing on me like a storm cloud that refused to break. Kelly was still moving through our house like nothing had changed, her lies stitched into the fabric of our everyday life. Each morning, she kissed me goodbye. Each evening she returned with a story rehearsed enough to make me sick. But the tracker didn't lie. Neither did the growing pile of evidence I'd gathered. Screenshots of her location history, photos of her with a man from the park, emails I'd managed to access from our shared laptop. His name was Andrew, a co-worker at her firm. The emails were brief but damning, filled with phrases like, "I can't stop thinking about you," and "next week, same place." Each message was a nail in the coffin of what I thought our marriage had been. The next move wasn't mine, it was hers. One evening, after putting away the dinner dishes, Kelly casually suggested we needed to spend more time together. She floated the idea of a weekend getaway, her smile bright and hopeful. It felt like a test. Maybe she'd sensed my distance, the way I'd stopped asking questions or pressing her for details about her late nights. Or maybe she thought she could bury the truth beneath a thin layer of romance, like a fresh coat of paint on a rotting wall. "Sure," I said, forcing a smile. "Let me know what weekend works for you." Her expression softened, relief flashing across her face. For a moment, I hated how much I still wanted to believe her. But I couldn't afford to give in. Not yet. The next morning, I made a call to Rebecca, a lawyer I'd been recommended by a friend who'd gone through a messy divorce last year. She was sharp, no nonsense, the kind of person who didn't waste time on theatrics. I laid everything out for her, the tracker logs, the photos, the emails. She listened without interruption, her voice calm and measured when she finally spoke. "You have more than enough to move forward," she said. "The evidence is airtight. When you're ready, we can file." I hesitated. "How long would it take?" She paused, her tone softening. "That depends on how hard she fights. But with what you've shown me, you're in a strong position." I thanked her, my mind already racing with what came next. That evening, Kelly came home later than usual, her hair wind-blown and her cheeks flushed. She claimed a meeting had run over, her tone casual, almost bored. I nodded, playing along, even as my phone buzzed in my pocket with a new tracker notification. Her location had pinged at Andrew's apartment for over an hour before she'd driven home. She sat across from me at the dinner table, chatting about her day like nothing was amiss. I watched her, noting the way her hand drifted to her phone, the way she avoided my gaze for just a fraction too long. She didn't know I already had the answers to the questions she thought I wasn't asking. The following week, I took things a step further. I hired a private investigator, a man named Paul, who came highly recommended and didn't ask unnecessary questions. I gave him everything I had, told him I needed more. He nodded, his expression professional but sympathetic. "You'll have what you need by the end of the week," he said. True to his word, Paul delivered. Photos of Kelly and Andrew at restaurants, walking hand in hand at the park, even kissing in the parking lot of the hotel. Each image was another confirmation of the betrayal she thought she'd hidden so well. The final piece was a recording, a snippet of a conversation they'd had at the park. The audio was muffled by wind, but the words were clear enough. "Andrew, I just want you to be happy. Kelly, I am with you." He doesn't notice anything. It's like I'm invisible at home. Invisible. The word hit harder than I expected, even though I'd been bracing for it. It was one thing to suspect, another to hear her say it out loud. That night, as she sat on the couch scrolling through her phone, I felt the weight of the truth settle over me. She didn't see me anymore? Not really. She'd painted me into a corner, reducing me to the man she blamed for her unhappiness, her choices. But she didn't realize the truth was already in my hands. I wasn't invisible. I was watching, waiting, and planning. Kelly thought she'd spun the perfect web, that she could keep me blind forever. But the threads were unraveling, and she was about to get caught in her own trap. And when the time came, she wouldn't see it coming. Kelly was walking through her life like nothing had changed, blissfully unaware that I was already 2 steps ahead. Every lie she told, every fake smile, every stolen moment with Andrew, it was all building to a crescendo she wouldn't see coming. I spent the next week refining my plan. The evidence I'd gathered was damning, but confrontation alone wasn't enough. I wanted her to feel the weight of her choices, to understand exactly what she'd thrown away. Revenge wasn't just about justice. It was about clarity. She'd painted me as the villain in her mind, the inattentive husband, the invisible man. It was time to shatter that illusion. The first step was preparation. Rebecca and I finalized the divorce paperwork, ensuring every detail was airtight. The house, the bulk of our savings, and full custody of any future children, all protected. Kelly's betrayal wasn't just a moral failure. It was a legal one, and the evidence would ensure the courts saw it that way. The second step was the setup. I didn't want the confrontation to be in private. No, that would be too simple. Kelly had spent months hiding behind her polished exterior, her carefully curated image. I wanted to strip that away, to reveal her lies in the starkest light possible. That's where the anniversary party came in. Our 8th wedding anniversary was approaching, and Kelly hadn't mentioned it once. In years past, she would have planned something elaborate, a weekend getaway, a fancy dinner, a gift wrapped in a bow. But this year, she'd been too busy with her late meetings to remember. Or so she thought. I decided to remind her. One evening, as we sat at the dinner table, I casually brought it up. Our anniversary is coming up, I said, keeping my tone light. I thought we could do something special this year. Maybe host a little party, invite some friends over. She blinked, clearly caught off guard, but she recovered quickly. That sounds nice, she said, her smile practiced. I'll let you handle the details. Perfect, I replied, forcing a smile of my own. I already have a few ideas. Over the next 2 weeks, I planned the party meticulously. I sent out invitations, hired a caterer, and made sure every detail was perfect. Kelly, true to form, let me take the reins, too distracted by Andrew to notice the subtle shifts in my demeanor. The guest list was carefully curated. Close friends, co-workers, and a few people from her office, including Andrew. I didn't invite him directly, of course. I made sure the invitation reached him through mutual channels, ensuring he wouldn't suspect a thing. The trap was set. Now I just had to wait. The night of the party arrived, and the house was immaculate. The living room was filled with laughter and the clink of glasses, the air buzzing with the energy of celebration. Kelly flitted through the crowd in a sleek black dress, her smile bright, her demeanor effortless. She was in her element, basking in the attention, the admiration. I watched her from across the room, the weight of what I was about to do settling over me. For a brief moment, I wondered if I was going too far. But then I remembered the lies, the late nights, the betrayal. This wasn't about cruelty. It was about truth. Halfway through the evening, as the guests mingled and the music played softly in the background, I stepped onto the makeshift stage I'd set up in the corner of the living room. I tapped a fork against my glass, the sound cutting through the chatter. Thank you all for coming, I began, my voice steady. Tonight, we're here to celebrate 8 years of marriage. 8 years of love, partnership, and truth. Kelly's smile faltered slightly, her eyes narrowing as she looked up at me. I met her gaze, holding it for a moment before continuing. I want to share something special with you all. A glimpse into the foundation of our marriage. The honesty and trust that have brought us here. I clicked a button on my phone, and the screen behind me lit up with a slideshow. But it wasn't the photos from our wedding or vacations. It was the evidence. Screenshots of her location at Andrew's apartment. Photos of them holding hands at the park. The damning emails and texts projected for everyone to see. The room went silent. Kelly's face drained of color as she stared at the screen, her expression a mix of shock and horror. The crowd shifted uncomfortably, whispers rippling through the room. Kelly, I said, my voice calm but firm. Would you like to explain this? She opened her mouth, but no words came out. Her polished facade had shattered, and for the first time in months, she looked truly vulnerable. The party ended abruptly, the guests leaving in stunned silence. Kelly tried to argue, to spin her excuses, but I didn't listen. I handed her the divorce papers, my voice steady as I said the words I'd been waiting to say. You thought I didn't see you, Kelly, but I saw everything. As she left that night, the weight of her choices finally visible on her face, I felt a strange sense of closure. The truth was out, the lies exposed. The web she'd spun had unraveled, and I'd made sure she felt every thread break. And as I stood in the empty living room, the remnants of the party scattered around me, I realized something. This wasn't just the end of our marriage. It was the beginning of my freedom. The silence after the party was deafening. The house, once filled with laughter and music, felt hollow, as though the weight of what had happened lingered in the air. Kelly had stormed out hours earlier, the divorce papers clutched in her trembling hands, her voice trailing off mid-protest. She hadn't come back, and I didn't expect her to. I sat on the couch, staring at the remnants of the evening. The half-empty wine glasses, the crumpled napkins, the looks of shock etched into the faces of the guests still vivid in my mind. The satisfaction I thought I'd feel was fleeting. What remained was a strange emptiness, like I'd cracked open a wound I wasn't prepared to confront. The next morning, I woke up to find her key on the kitchen counter, along with a hastily scrawled note. I hope this makes you feel better about everything. You've won, Caleb. It wasn't an apology, far from it. It was dripping with sarcasm, her way of trying to regain control. But she didn't realize the game was over. This wasn't about winning. It was about closure, and for the first time in months, I felt like I could finally take a deep breath. The fallout from the party spread quickly. Mutual friends called, some offering sympathy, others fishing for details. A few expressed discomfort, their tones judgmental as they questioned why I'd aired such private matters so publicly. You didn't have to humiliate her like that, one friend said, her voice tight with disapproval. I held my ground, my voice calm. She humiliated herself. I just revealed the truth. Most of them didn't press further, though I knew the story would spread. That was fine. Kelly had spent months crafting her narrative, painting herself as the perfect wife while betraying me behind my back. Now the mask was off, and I wasn't about to apologize for it. A week after the party, I met with Rebecca to finalize the next steps in the divorce. She was impressed by the thoroughness of the evidence, the legal grounds for my case ironclad. She doesn't have much to fight with, Rebecca said. The prenup and the proof of infidelity give you the upper hand. This will be quick, assuming she doesn't try to contest it. I nodded, though a part of me wondered if Kelly would go quietly. She wasn't the type to admit defeat easily, but her absence since the party suggested she'd run out of moves. It didn't take long for the papers to make their way back to me, signed and unchallenged. The process was smoother than I'd expected, almost anticlimactic. Rebecca called me a few days later to confirm the court date and assure me that everything was proceeding as planned. She's accepted the terms, Rebecca said. You'll get the house, the savings, and everything outlined in the agreement. It was done. Just like that, 8 years of marriage reduced to signatures and legal jargon. Kelly's absence from my life was both a relief and a void I hadn't anticipated. The house felt larger without her in it, the silence occasionally overwhelming. I filled my days with work, projects around the house, and reconnecting with friends I'd unintentionally drifted from during the marriage. One evening, while cleaning out the bedroom, I came across a box of mementos, photos, love letters, little trinkets from trips we'd taken together. I sat on the floor, sifting through them, my chest tight with a mix of nostalgia and anger. I kept a few things, the photos with family, the memories that didn't feel tainted. The rest I boxed up and set in the garage. Maybe one day I'd know what to do with it, but for now, it wasn't part of the life I was building. Weeks turned into months, and the wound began to heal. I started spending more time with friends, saying yes to invitations I would have once ignored. The quiet evenings alone turned into opportunities for reflection rather than sources of pain. One night, as I sat on the back porch with a glass of whiskey, watching the stars, I felt something I hadn't in a long time. Peace. The betrayal, the lies, the anger. They were still there, but they didn't define me anymore. I wasn't the man Kelly had tried to break. I was stronger than that. The party, the confrontation, the divorce. It had all been necessary, a painful but cathartic purge of the life we'd built together. Now the path ahead was mine to walk. Kelly thought she'd destroyed me, that her lies would leave me shattered. But she didn't realize one thing. I wasn't just rebuilding. I was thriving. The days that followed felt like the calm after a violent storm, quiet, reflective, and strangely liberating. With the divorce finalized and Kelly out of the picture, the house was mine again. Not the shared space of a fractured marriage, but a blank slate, a canvas waiting for something new. The first thing I did was redecorate. I didn't want the remnants of Kelly's taste lingering in every corner, reminding me of what had been. The sleek, modern furniture she'd insisted on was replaced with pieces that felt warm and lived in. The walls, once painted in the muted tones she adored, now wore vibrant colors that brought the house to life. It wasn't just a house anymore. It was my home. I tackled the backyard next, turning it into an oasis of sorts. The overgrown garden became a sanctuary of wildflowers and greenery, the patio outfitted with a fire pit and cozy chairs. It became my favorite spot to unwind, a place where I could breathe and think without the weight of the past pressing down on me. Work became my anchor. I threw myself into projects at the firm, staying late to finish presentations and taking on new clients. My colleagues noticed the change in me, their curiosity thinly veiled. A few asked if I was okay, their concern genuine, but I didn't offer much beyond a simple reassurance. I'm doing better than ever, I'd say. And for the first time in years, it felt true. Kelly's attempts to reinsert herself into my life came sporadically at first, texts left unanswered, phone calls I ignored. She sent a long email once, apologizing for what she called mistakes and asking if we could meet to talk. I didn't respond. She'd had her chance to talk, and she'd used it to lie. I wasn't interested in hearing her excuses, her twisted justifications. The silence was my answer, and eventually she seemed to accept it. One afternoon, as I was sorting through the garage, I found the box of mementos I'd packed away after the divorce. It was covered in dust, the tape on the edges starting to peel. I stared at it for a long moment, debating whether to open it or toss it. In the end, I did neither. I carried it to the curb and left it there, a silent acknowledgement that I no longer needed the weight of those memories. They weren't mine anymore. They belonged to a version of me that didn't exist. The first real step forward came unexpectedly. A mutual friend, Amanda, invited me to a small dinner party at her place, insisting that I needed to get out of the house and socialize like a normal human. I laughed it off but agreed to go, more out of curiosity than enthusiasm. The evening was casual, filled with laughter and the smell of homemade pasta. Amanda introduced me to her friends, and for the first time in what felt like forever, I found myself genuinely enjoying the company. One of her friends, a woman named Claire, caught my attention. She was warm, funny, and completely unpretentious, her stories filled with self-deprecating humor and an easy confidence. We spent most of the evening talking, our conversation ranging from travel to books to the absurdity of modern dating. By the time the party wound down, she handed me her number with a smile. "Call me sometime," she said, her tone light. No pressure. It took me a week to work up the nerve, but I did call her. Our first date was simple, a walk in the park followed by coffee at a small cafe. There was no pretense, no expectations, just two people enjoying each other's company. It felt easy, like I didn't have to try to be anything but myself. Over time, Claire became a part of my life in a way that felt natural and unforced. She wasn't replacing Kelly. She wasn't trying to. She was simply Claire, and that was more than enough. One evening, as we sat on the back patio, the fire pit crackling softly between us, she looked at me with a curious expression. "You seem lighter," she said, "like you've let go of something heavy." I thought about her words, about everything that had brought me to this moment, the betrayal, the confrontation, the rebuilding. She wasn't wrong. The weight of the past had lifted, replaced by something stronger, something unshakable. I said, my voice steady. "And it feels good." She smiled, leaning back in her chair, her eyes reflecting the firelight. "I'm glad." As the weeks turned into months, the life I'd rebuilt began to feel like my own. The scars of the past were still there, faint but present, a reminder of the lessons I'd learned. But they didn't define me anymore. They were just a part of the story, not the whole. And as I sat on the patio that night, the stars bright overhead and Claire's laughter ringing in my ears, I realized something. I wasn't just surviving. I was living. By the time spring rolled around, life had settled into a rhythm I hadn't expected to find so quickly. The house felt full again, not with echoes of the past, but with the sounds of a life that was growing. Claire wasn't just a presence. She was a partner, someone who fit seamlessly into the world I'd rebuilt. The boys at work had started teasing me. I wasn't blind to the looks my co-workers exchanged when I walked into meetings looking a little sharper than usual. They'd started calling me Mr. Renaissance, joking about how I'd gone from overworked and withdrawn to someone who seemed genuinely happy. One afternoon, my boss pulled me aside, a grin on his face. "Whatever you're doing, Caleb, keep doing it. You're on fire lately." I nodded, a small smile tugging at my lips. It was true. My focus had sharpened, my creativity reignited. It was as though the act of reclaiming my life had brought everything else into alignment. Claire and I had fallen into a pattern of quiet comfort. Our weekends were filled with long walks, shared meals, and lazy afternoons spent reading or working on little projects around the house. She was good with her hands, fixing things, building things, and we'd spent more than one Saturday covered in sawdust or paint. One weekend, she suggested we tackle the backyard shed, a project I'd been avoiding for years. We spent hours cleaning it out, tossing old tools and boxes of forgotten junk. Amid the clutter, we found an old set of camping gear I hadn't used in a decade. "You ever think about going back out there?" she asked, holding up the dusty tent bag. I laughed, shaking my head. "It's been years. I don't even know if I remember how to set it up." She grinned, a spark of mischief in her eyes. "Guess we'll have to find out." A few weeks later, we were out in the woods, the tent pitched under a canopy of trees, the scent of pine and damp earth filling the air. It had been years since I'd gone camping, but the simplicity of it felt like coming home. We cooked dinner over a campfire, the flames casting flickering shadows across her face as she told me stories about her childhood. As the night wore on and the stars filled the sky, I felt something shift. It wasn't just the serenity of the woods or the warmth of the fire. It was the realization that I'd found something real, something worth holding on to. The next morning, as we packed up camp, Claire turned to me, her expression thoughtful. "You seem different out here," she said. "Lighter, happier." I glanced around at the forest, the sunlight filtering through the trees. "It feels good to disconnect," I said, "to get back to basics." She smiled, leaning against the car as she watched me load the last of the gear. "You've come a long way, Caleb. I hope you know that." Her words stayed with me on the drive home, the truth of them settling deep into my bones. I had come a long way, further than I thought possible. The betrayal that had once defined me was now just a chapter in a much larger story. Over the next few weeks, Claire and I started talking about the future. It wasn't a rushed conversation, just small moments woven into our time together. A casual mention of a trip we could take, the idea of building a garden in the backyard. There was no pressure, no urgency, just the steady unfolding of something real. One evening, as we sat on the couch, her head resting on my shoulder, she asked a question that caught me off guard. "Do you think you'll ever forgive her? Kelly, I mean?" I didn't answer right away. The question lingered in the air, heavy with possibilities. Finally, I sighed. "I don't know. I don't hate her anymore, if that's what you're asking. But forgiveness? I don't think it's about her. It's about me. And I think I'm getting there." She nodded, her hand finding mine. "That's all that matters." That night, as I lay in bed, I thought about what forgiveness really meant. It wasn't about excusing Kelly's actions or pretending they hadn't hurt. It was about letting go of the hold they had on me, about freeing myself from the bitterness that had threatened to consume me. For the first time, I felt like I could do that. Not because I owed Kelly anything, but because I owed it to myself. The turning point had come and gone. What lay ahead was mine to shape, and for the first time, I wasn't afraid of the unknown. I was ready to embrace it. By summer, the transformation felt complete. The house had become a home again, every room filled with warmth and laughter. The backyard, once a neglected patch of weeds, was now a vibrant garden where Claire and I spent countless evenings tending to the flowers and vegetables we'd planted together. The scars of the past were still there, faint but visible, like lines on an old map. But they no longer defined me. They were part of the journey, not the destination. One evening, as Claire and I sat on the patio watching the sun dip below the horizon, She leaned over and rested her head on my shoulder. The air was warm, the scent of lavender and freshly mowed grass mingling with the hum of cicadas. "You ever think about what's next?" she asked softly, her voice carrying a mix of curiosity and hope. I glanced at her, the question settling over me like a blanket. I did think about it, more often than I cared to admit. But for once, the thought of the future didn't feel daunting. It felt exciting, like stepping into a wide-open field with nothing but possibilities ahead. All the time, I admitted, and for the first time in a long time, I feel ready for it. She smiled, her hand finding mine. "Me too." The next day, I got an email from Kelly. It was short, almost businesslike, but the subtext was clear. "I've been thinking about everything that happened. I just want to say I'm sorry, Caleb. I hope you're doing well." I stared at the screen for a long time, unsure of how to respond, or if I even wanted to. The apology was too late, too small to bridge the canyon she created. But it wasn't about her anymore. It was about me. Finally, I typed a simple reply. "I appreciate the apology. I hope you're doing well too." It wasn't forgiveness, not entirely, but it was closure. A final note on a chapter one was ready to leave behind. A few weeks later, Claire and I took the boys on a weekend trip to the mountains. It was a mix of hiking, fishing, and campfire stories, the kind of simple joys that made life feel full. Watching Maddox and Noah run ahead on the trail, their laughter echoing through the trees, I felt a wave of gratitude. This was my life now, not the one I'd envisioned all those years ago, but one I'd fought to create. And it was better than I ever could have imagined. On the last night of the trip, as the boys dozed in their sleeping bags and the fire crackled softly, Claire turned to me, her expression thoughtful. "I'm proud of you, Caleb. You've come so far." I smiled, her words filling me with a quiet sense of pride. "I couldn't have done it without you," I said, my voice low. She shook her head, her hand resting on mine. "You did this, Caleb. You chose to heal, to move forward. I was just lucky enough to be part of the journey." Her words stayed with me long after we'd packed up and returned home. She was right. I'd chosen this path. I'd chosen to rebuild, to find happiness again, to let go of the weight that had once held me down. That summer became a turning point, not just for me, but for all of us. The life I'd rebuilt with Claire wasn't just about survival. It was about thriving, about embracing the future with open arms. The past no longer haunted me. It was a part of my story, but it wasn't the whole story. And as I stood in the garden one evening, watching Claire laugh with the boys as they chased fireflies, I realized something. I wasn't just healed. I was whole. By fall, the life Claire and I had woven together felt like a tapestry, layered, vibrant, and uniquely ours. The boys adored her, and she had a knack for connecting with them in ways that felt effortless. Maddox challenged her to soccer matches in the backyard, and Noah often dragged her into the kitchen to bake cookies, their laughter filling the house. It wasn't just a family. It was our family, one built on honesty, trust, and the shared understanding of what it meant to rebuild. One crisp September afternoon, Claire surprised me with an idea. We were walking through the local farmer's market, sipping coffee and admiring the stalls of fresh produce and handmade crafts, when she stopped abruptly, her eyes lighting up. "What if we opened a small shop? Something we could build together?" I blinked, caught off guard by the suggestion. "A shop? Doing what?" She grinned, her excitement infectious. "Something that combines everything we love. Gardening supplies, handmade goods, maybe even some local art. It could be a space for the community, something meaningful." Her vision was bold, but as she described it, I could see it so clearly in my mind. A small, welcoming space filled with life and creativity. A place that reflected who we were and what we'd become. "Let's do it," I said, surprising even myself. "Let's build it." Over the next few months, the shop became our project. We found a vacant space downtown, its worn floors and chipped paint brimming with potential. Weekends were spent cleaning, painting, and bringing Claire's vision to life. Maddox and Noah pitched in, turning the renovation into a family affair. By December, the shop was ready. We called it Root in Bloom, a name that felt like a nod to the journey we'd all been on, rooting ourselves in the present, blooming into something new. The grand opening was a quiet but meaningful affair. Friends and neighbors stopped by, their support a reminder of the community we'd built around us. Claire's handmade planters and garden kits were a hit, and the boys took turns helping customers and sneaking snacks from the counter. As I stood behind the register, watching the shop come to life, I felt an overwhelming sense of pride. This wasn't just a business. It was a testament to how far we'd come, a tangible symbol of the life we'd rebuilt together. Kelly's presence in my thoughts had faded to a faint whisper by then, her role in my story reduced to a distant memory. She sent a holiday card that year, a generic message scrawled inside. I read it once, then tossed it into the recycling bin without a second thought. I didn't hate her. I didn't even pity her. I simply didn't think about her anymore. One evening, as we closed up the shop and turned off the lights, Claire took my hand, her eyes shining in the dim glow of the streetlights. "We did this," she said softly. "Together." I nodded, squeezing her hand. Together. That winter, life settled into a rhythm that felt effortless. The shop thrived, the boys excelled in school, and the house was filled with a kind of quiet joy I hadn't thought possible a year ago. One night, as we sat by the fire, the boys asleep upstairs, Claire turned to me with a question I hadn't expected. "Do you think you're happy now? Truly happy?" I looked at her, at the life we'd built, at the warmth in her eyes and the love that radiated from every corner of our home. "Yeah," I said, my voice steady. "I am." For the first time in years, I wasn't just saying it to convince myself. I wasn't just surviving. I was living a life I loved, with people who made it worth every moment. And as the fire crackled softly in the hearth, I knew the truth. The pain, the betrayal, the rebuilding, it had all led me here. To happiness. To peace. To home. Spring brought a sense of renewal, not just in the air, but in our lives. The garden behind the shop bloomed into a vibrant array of colors, each flower and plant a testament to what we'd built together. Root in Bloom had become more than a business. It was a hub for the community, a place where people gathered, shared stories, and found inspiration. The shop wasn't just Claire's dream anymore. It was ours. The boys had found their footing in the new life we'd created. Maddox was thriving on his soccer team, his natural leadership shining through. Noah's creative streak had only deepened. He'd taken up woodworking and was even selling small pieces in the shop. Watching them grow into their passions filled me with a pride I couldn't put into words. One evening, as we sat at the dinner table, Maddox looked up from his plate, his expression serious. "Dad, do you think we're better off now? Like, as a family?" His question hung in the air for a moment, heavy but not unwelcome. I set my fork down and looked at both boys, their faces expectant. "Yeah," I said finally, my voice steady. "I think we are. We've been through a lot, but we've built something stronger. Something real." Noah grinned, his eyes lighting up. "I like it better this way." Maddox nodded, his expression softening. "Me too." Claire's presence in our lives felt like a natural extension of the family we'd rebuilt. The boys adored her, and she had a way of making everything feel effortless, whether it was helping Noah with a project or cheering Maddox on at his games. She wasn't trying to replace anyone. She was just being herself. And that was more than enough. One weekend, as we worked in the garden behind the shop, she turned to me, her hands dirty from planting. "Do you ever think about how far you've come?" she asked, her tone curious but gentle. "All the time," I said. "It's hard not to." She smiled, brushing a strand of hair from her face. "You should be proud of yourself, Caleb. Not everyone can do what you've done." Her words stayed with me. I was proud, not just of the life we'd built, but of the person I'd become. The betrayal that had once threatened to destroy me had instead become the foundation for something greater. That summer, we hosted a small party at the shop to celebrate its one-year anniversary. Friends, neighbors, and customers came together, filling the space with laughter and joy. The boys ran around serving drinks and snacks, while Claire and I greeted guests and shared the story of how Root and Bloom had come to be. As I stood there, watching the people who'd become part of our journey, I felt an overwhelming sense of gratitude. This was the life I'd fought for, the life I'd chosen to create. It wasn't perfect, but it was mine, and it was beautiful. Kelly sent one last email that fall. It was short, a few sentences acknowledging the divorce and wishing me well. I read it once, then archived it. It didn't stir any emotions, no anger or resentment. Just a quiet acknowledgement that she was part of the past, and the past was where she belonged. By the time the first frost arrived, life felt settled in a way I hadn't thought possible. The house was filled with warmth, the shop was thriving, and the boys were growing into young men I was endlessly proud of. Claire and I had built something real together, something that felt unshakable. One evening, as we sat around the fire pit in the backyard, the boys roasting marshmallows and Claire leaning against me, I felt a deep sense of peace. This is it, I thought. This is what it means to live. The betrayal that had once consumed me was now a distant memory, a shadow that no longer held any power. It had led me here, to a life that was full of love, purpose, and joy. And as I looked around at the people I loved, the life we'd built together, I knew the truth. This wasn't just a happy ending. It was a new beginning. What are your thoughts on my story? Let me know in the comments what you think about my choice and how you might have dealt with it.